sit there and go up and down.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I can do you up and down.
Well, sorry I've only just got here, guys. I could blame the European Union tourists and the tube stations.
What about
That sounds believable.
Brexit? No, Brexit's all right. But it hasn't happened yet. Right. I think your table would be handy.
I'll make myself comfortable. I apologise.
Where are you going to sit?
I'll be over here.
Oh, okay. All right, so here we have the world. I'll put the world so you can see it there as well as the screen. Okay. Thank you very much for coming. It's a great venue, and I know it's difficult for people to do Sundays. Have we got? How long have we got until?
We only booked till 7:30.
Yeah, but if we carry on, is there a problem?
I don't know. We'll be fine. We'll be fine. Can you
press
work
on.
From downstairs and find out? Yeah, press on.
Okay. So this is billed as a report back from Porto Climate Realist Conference, and I noticed I've been billed as a rebel physicist. I prefer to be billed as a real physicist, as opposed to those who. Well, you've heard discussion just now about measurements and people obsessing with their particular measurements. I mean, I think that I don't want to get into all those discussions about data, but there's definitely two problems. One is that physicists believe all their instruments and overstate their own accuracies. That is the biggest problem. Secondly, definitions change. And thirdly, physics is full of assumptions of things which they deem to be constant when they're not. And fourthly, there may actually be actual changes going on, i.e. the gravitational constant not being constant once you fix the speed of light. And it's important to understand these things are connected to each other, you see. I mean, if you start defining the speed of light, then distances are going to change if the speed of light in other terms changes, you understand. Okay, so what I'm going to do is three things. One, a very short kind of summary of what was generally happened in the Porto conference. Secondly, I'm going to give my first presentation, or the essence of it, and then I'm going to give my second presentation, or an essence of it, which is the more interesting stuff for electric universe. Right, and well, it's good to see a wide range of people here. I see there's a couple of seats near the front for anyone who wants. An important point we have to make before I say anything is that because we're challenging certain norms in standard physics and meteorology, then we have to have our own physics right and our own measurements and estimations and arguments right. And if we don't, we'll come a cropper. We know they can get away with tricks and errors, but we can't and shouldn't.
Do you say errors in meteorology or meteorology?
Well, actually both, but I did mean meteorology, but I think metrology. Sometimes I receive stuff from the others when I mean, yeah. Okay. Now, the event began with a Professor Christopher Essex from Canada, who he made some very interesting comments about looking at meteorology in particular, but also physics in general on different timescales. And just to give a kind of example, which then you can understand how it's applied, he took these films of like cars going down a road and parking, right? And you look in a normal film, you see the cars and you see them park, and there you are, simple. But if you then time-lapse that into compressing it into a very short time, so you average out all the cars and the parking, then what happens, you just see an empty road, because there's no particular car in any one place, but the road is always there. So the average of the film gives the road. So it's an empty road, and if you include night, it's got red streaks one way and white, white the other way. but there's still no cars. But if you look in the car park, there are ghost cars. They're not actual cars, because each car parking space has got a fuzzy image of a car, because some cars have come in and come out, and there's been a space there some of the time, but they're all parking roughly in this right place. So the point is, he says, look, when you analyse physical data on different timescales, you can see it in different ways. And a very important thing about the complexity of the atmospheric system is that if you try and solve the so-called, the Navier-Stokes equations, which is standard physics, i.e. Newton's laws of motion and so forth, and thermodynamics applied to the atmosphere, then to do it properly, you're going to have to do things down to a scale of a millimetre or so, and then predict upwards, even if you could rely on predicting upwards, which is impossible. So what they do is they average on certain timescales. And the point is, on different timescales, you can see different things. And when you look on timescales of averaged over days, it's easier to understand, or averaged over years, you get rid of the annual vibrations and so forth. So he says a lot of advances can be made by applying sort of extensions of mathematics to the Navier-Stokes equation on different timescales. And I think it was very convincing. I know I haven't given you any specific examples, but you know, I don't know if any of you heard of Fourier analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah. So have you heard of the Wigner-Veal Fourier analysis?
No.
No. Okay, but that's just a bit like what Christopher Essex said, but applied to normal Fourier analysis. So you can see slow timescales and quicker time signals more easily. Okay, so that was just a kind of background, and the big point he made is to simplify the equations of the atmosphere, you pop in with things which are too complicated to say what they actually are. So you have estimates of so-called constants, and these are stuck into the equations. And he says these, of course, probably lead to consistent errors in certain directions. I mean, I know for a fact that all these equations lead to warmer winters than actually happen. Now, there's two assumptions there. Probably some of the standard assumptions that he was referring to. The other one, of course, is the radiation model included within standard meteorology, which adds in a CO2 effect which doesn't exist. So you always get warmer winters. Another interesting thing which came up, and which is not specifically about electricity, but it's about challenging current paradigms in a sense, or actually correcting modern paradigms, is Carl Zeller and Ned and Carl, who explain very clearly that the reason for the surface of the Earth being warmer is because we have an atmosphere, and it's colder higher up and warmer lower down, and so on. And this is nothing to do with carbon dioxide or greenhouse effect whatsoever. It would happen irrespective of any so-called greenhouse effect or soot or particles or cardboard or whatever in the atmosphere. And what they've done really is just a correction to a paradigm trick which the CO2 people imposed to pretend that CO2 caused the adiabatic temperature drop as you go higher up, which of course is complete physical nonsense. And the warmists have got away with physical nonsense for far too long. But they have made advances, Carl and Ned, in applying these ideas to other planets, you see. So I think they've done tremendous stuff. On the kind of more political front, Philip Foster there gave a little presentation about Grenfell Tower, where he pointed out that the green ideology forced upon us is actually the cause of problems there.
Yes.
I mean, one, the getting rid of the CFCs from the refrigerators and replacing them, which is not flammable, replacing them with something which is burnable. The whole ozone hole story was a con anyway, and created by DuPont in order to bring in a new material when their patents ran out, which I didn't know this for a long time, but that is how it happened. So the cause of that fire was green rice. The spreading of the fire, of course, was justified. Well, not justified. The spreading of the fire happened because of the cladding, which was a burnable cladding, but the cladding itself happened for an obsession with insulation. Not that insulation is bad. I mean, that could well be a good thing. But there are other forms of insulation, such as white asbestos, which is not dangerous. Blue asbestos is very dangerous, but white asbestos is not. However, the councils and those who are removing asbestos will say, oh, well, all asbestos is bad, and they'll charge loads of money to remove it. So those three things, asbestos, the CFCs and the cladding, of course, led to at least 72 deaths, which I dare say was a lot more. Another thing of great interest there was people investigating planetary alignments and so on, which I've done loads of this stuff myself, but they reported on things and sort of special ratios turning up, which I'm not saying magic ratios or anything, because people start going on and on about Fibonacci series when I think they overstate the importance of things they find. But nevertheless, there are very interesting what's called resonances, which indicate obviously complicated feedbacks between motion of the planets and the sun, or interaction between planets and other planets. Right. Niels Axel Morner, the main convener, who's a world expert on sea level rise, he said some very interesting stuff, but I'll deal with that specifically in my talks. The good thing news about the future was we had a little meeting in a hotel on the third day in the morning, where it was revealed that, well, first of all, we agreed to coordinate with each other better, and it was the best quality conference of this type been around for a while. There's going to be allegedly a sequel to the global warming swindle by Martin Durkin, where I think he's going to be calling it Paradogma, but I'm not sure. Anyway, or perhaps that's a shorthand name for now. And Martin Poles, who did have film a year ago or so called The Uncertainty Is Settled, which was very effective, is also doing more films. Okay, so that is a kind of a summary of what else happened apart from what I said. All right, so thanks very much, Phil, for getting this to work. If you sort of wind this up, just to say that, just go down again. No, right, there we go. What I'm going to talk about, section 1 about climate changes, past and present, and nailing the CO2 theory, sort of systematically, and then moving on to new stuff. Okay, next one. We better just flash past these things. It's just to tell you I got a first class degree and got a Royal Scholarship and did Imperial College and did research in Queen Mary College in astrophysics and won lots of money from William Hill with weather bets. And they banned me when we floated on the stock exchange. And I asked them, well, why did you pay us out for 12 years anyway? And he said, oh, Mr. Corbyn, April. I said, what do you mean April? He said, well, when you give us bets on April, we can work out what the going's going to be in Aintree. And that we then adjust our bets in advance, he says, adjust their odds. So, you know, they'd make about $1 million out of that on a day, whereas they might lose a few thousand to $1 million a year. So it was a no-brainer, really, to carry on losing to me. Anyway, we set up Weather Action Limited, which I was insured for £1 million, key man. So if I died, the company would get £1 million, which was a plan B.
Didn't succeed, did they?
Right, next one. Anyway, carry on. Right, so, history. Well, just to get clear, the CO2 story, there is no evidence for the CO2 story. Now, I put out a press release only yesterday because there's another rally this one's in Korea, a jamboree and junket for climate change CO2 believers. And I said there's no scientific peer-reviewed paper which shows real measurements of carbon dioxide cause real changes in world temperature. No, I've challenged them to come back with a paper. See, there isn't any papers, nothing at all. All they do is say CO2 is dangerous, CO2 is going up, therefore we're in danger. Okay, what's happened is world temperatures actually have been pretty constant, even though solar output has changed in the last 600 million years, and CO2 levels have gone wildly, right? And we're down here now or down there. We're here now, but it's the same as it was 300 million years ago. So that is the point. But the interesting thing about this is the Earth is a kind of constant temperature system to some extent. I mean, and there's these big changes, but there's a sort of cap on it to do with ice, forests probably, water vapour evaporating very quickly when you get over 30 degrees C, stuff like that. Well, that's a world average, you see. Okay, anyway, move on quickly, please. Thanks very much. And well done on finding this on the internet, because we had a problem of this man here. We could thank, what's your name?
Cheeky.
Cheeky. Chi.
As in energy, electric energy in the body.
Chi. Okay. Well, because Phil didn't have this PowerPoint on his computer. Anyway, got that. Anyway, the last 9,000 years or 10,000 years, there have been peaks of temperatures roughly every 1,000 years. The current one we're at, and now we've left the top of, is lower than all the others that have happened in the last 10,000 years. And this 10,000 years being an interglacial, and that way we're going to have, we had our ice age for 130,000 years, and this way, after something we don't know, they're going to have another ice age. That's what we would say, by mean a full ice age. And we're heading for a mini ice age, like these things that have, well, this one and this one and so on, you see. Okay, carry on. Right, what we do know for sure is that the medieval warm period and these warmer times are associated with high solar activity, if you slide that up a little bit, and low solar activity relates to the minimum of activity, and cold, the little ice age, and the other Dickens winters, which is another mini ice age. Okay, and this is not disputed by anybody, although the Climate Research Unit of East Anglia tried to rub out this data.
Phil Jones.
That is the name, Phil Jones, a fraudster. Next one.
What is the evidence? Is it dendrochronological, or what is the actual...
What they did was they chose one particular pine tree, or possibly it was two, bristlecone pine, and found that that helped their argument. But if you go down again, I don't really want to, this will take it. All right, that helped their argument because it got rid of the medieval warm period. But when they went on using that data set, then it gave a dramatic plunge to way down and down and down. Well, they got this to work, and then it was just getting, well, they wiped that out, wobbled around here, but then it was going to go down now instead of up. So they had to hide the decline. That's what they did. So then they just deleted their new bit and added in some new measurements. Anyway, it was a con. Right, next one.
Well, the BBC fell for it.
Oh, what's the
Well, the BBC are part of the
BBC
problem.
will perform, won't they?
They probably asked them to do it, I don't know. Anyway, we're meant to have had half a degree or 0.6 of a degree of rise since 2000 or since 97. We've had nothing, according to satellite data. Satellite data, right. Whereas, carry on. This is their models, and this is what's happened under satellite and balloon data, and now it's going down. Next ones. And in terms of solar activity, we are here. Up a little notch, there we are. Rapid decline of solar activity. Now, there's a great question. We're in solar cycle 24. Is solar cycle 25 going to be higher or lower? And bear in mind, the odd cycles are on average warmer than the even cycles because the magnetic conductivity is better. Now, the Russians, my friend Kirill, that does dynamo theory in Moscow and Beijing, says that their estimates, which are based on the last few solar cycles, suggest 25 might be a bit bigger than 24. However, his look-back data for this procedure is a bit short compared with, the general scale of things. So I don't know if we can rely on that. There's other rationals who say we're going to go down and then we're going to go carry on down and we're going to head for the full ice age, whatever, without a return after 2030. Now, I don't agree with that
So
either.
we're not at the bottom then. 2030 would be more or less the bottom.
Yeah, we're not at the bottom yet. No, we're not at the bottom.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. People are saying, the minimums come early, but whenever you've got a low one, that minimums are always later. So that's a kind of contradiction there. I think you just have a prolonged minimum, I think, is a fair way of putting it. Okay, next one. Right, what is in the picture now? We had a very cold winter, Northern Hemisphere just passed, okay? Next one. And we've also had extra ice in Greenland, and that's happened last year and this year. The BBC don't tell you that bit; they just tell you when it melts, because obviously it fluctuates. But
So the polar bears are swimming. Yeah.
Oh, polar bears are doing better than they ever have. But don't let you upset your beliefs if there's any green freak in here. But I don't think there is. If there is, I apologise for calling you a freak.
What it proves that polar bears can swim, so that's fair enough.
Polar bears can swim, yeah, and they can organise, but they can't fly yet. This could happen soon.
I mean, I think it's quite complicated in Greenland in that some bits
Yeah,
are
of course,
melting and other bits are
Of course,
calving. They don't really understand.
Well,
some glasses are advancing.
I do have a graph of all that over there, but that's just detail. Most of it is getting thicker. The edges are not, and that's where there's various ocean currents, and the BBC is probably warming up the ground by jumping up and down. Let's go on. The Atlantic now is cooling, the North Atlantic especially, which is partly a factor in reducing, on average, hurricane formation, but mainly it's cold in the northern parts. Okay, here we are, cold declines, and this is what 1990 to now. You see, so it's a continuous decline over some years now, which is a standard form for mini ice age. Historically, after ice ages, the southern hemisphere warms up first, and then the northern hemisphere when the Atlantic Ocean starts to reorganise circulation. And similarly for cooling, the southern hemisphere leads things, generally speaking. Now it looks like what's happening now is the northern hemisphere Atlantic is reorganising itself. Okay, down. We had these claims of hottest ever summer, northern hemisphere, July. Well, first of all, we did predict this hot July in Britain and Europe, and it's a bit like 1976, which is 42 years ago. But they didn't tell us on the BBC there was actually extreme cold in Russia and various other parts of the world, and in the world as a whole, Australia was super cold. They didn't tell you that either, or there's a footnote. Okay.
How long ahead did you predict it?
About 6 months, I think, that one, because it's reasonably comprehensible. The actual facts, though, on the 30th of July, which was a good sort of day to say what was happening there, because these things are very slowly. The northern hemisphere average land temperature was 0.2 degrees centigrade below normal. Not a world, or not a northern hemisphere world record heat wave.
So where was that? In Britain?
No, the world. The whole of the northern hemisphere land temperature was 0.2 degrees centigrade below normal on the 30th of July. So, the BBC stuff was pure propaganda and lies, and they know it. Okay. Important thing about meteorology, standard meteorology just says the weather causes weather. The weather is this thin layer, thinner than my hand on the surface of the globe. That's where an aeroplanes fly at the top of that, like a piece of cardboard above there. The weather in that is caused by the weather which has already happened. That's their basic thing. So they won't have signal in it, whereas there is signal in it, 22 years, 60 years, 155 days. And all of these are solar or solar-lunar explained. Our 60-year period is solar-lunar.
We haven't got
explained.
132 in there.
No, that's not a... well, it's not like a beat. It's a kind of coincidental thing that can work at times. So you won't get a graph that will show that by analysing data. I'll explain. It's technical, but these are accepted known periods.
I know what ENSO is, I don't know what QBO.
QBO is quasi-biennial oscillation, which is 2 1/3 years of stratospheric winds going east or west and then east again. Equatorial stratospheric winds. And ENSO is the El Nino, the warming of the Pacific, or it has worldwide effects, or actually the worldwide effects are causing the warming of the Pacific, but that's... Okay, next one. Right, key message. If you think about it, water could flow uphill. If you watch the BBC, it will flow uphill.
Salmon go uphill.
There we are, look at it, it's going uphill, and then it goes down again. Am I right or am I right? This is a fair picture, isn't it? You could take a photograph of that.
Do like Escher.
Do you? Okay. Anyway, the point is that this is a two-dimensional drawing, a representation of reality, but if you try and make it in 3D, you can't. Now, that's the point about physics. You can write all sorts of simplified equations in 2 dimensions or 1 dimension or 3 dimensions when you're leaving out time variations or whatever. And some of the stuff is complete codswallop, in particular the arrows of radiation in global warming and so forth. Okay. Point is, physical equations are nothing at all other than writings on the wall. They're nothing other than that. They're representations of concepts. You were told that 97% of scientists believe in man-made climate change. Untrue. The actual data that they analysed and the papers they listed show that only 0.3% of them said man-made climate change was the key driver, and maybe 0.5% said it had something to do with it, and the rest said nothing, but they put climate change in the headline to get a grant. All right, next one. Right, now, the key reasons why the CO2 theory fails, quite apart from the fact that that it's an artificial theory anyway, but, you know, just look at the actual claims. We go up slightly. Do better one, this one. Right, that's enough, yeah. Carbon dioxide levels are an effect, not a cause of climate. In other words, when the world warms up, then CO2 increases afterwards, and it comes out of the sea, for example. You warm up the sea, which has got 50 times more CO2 than the air, warm it up a bit, and CO2 comes off. Cool down, and it goes in. Goes back in there. And the data shows that on average, after every ice age, about 600, 800 years later, CO2 levels will go up when the world warms up. Secondly, the idea that man rules is nonsense, because man's contribution to this flux of CO2 in and out of the biosphere, or in and out of the sea, is only 4%. So the other 96% is doing its own thing, I would suggest. I don't believe that termites are sitting around by the road waiting for a car to go past. Saying, "Oh God, there's a car past, let's produce more CO2 in harmony." Right? I mean, that would have to happen if man CO2 rules. Nature has to follow. So they're requiring a conspiracy of nature, which is complete utter bollocks. It's crap, it's nonsense, it's poppycock. But nevertheless, that is their belief. And the other thing is that all the extremes that are happening now are the wrong type of extremes. You see, the CO2 theory says we've got a warmer world, so the jet stream is going to be further north. That's sensible. So the cold area is less and the warm area is bigger. Okay? And a shorter jet stream, which is to be obviously further north, can't wave around so much, and we're just going to have rather benign, warm summers, mild winters, and so on. You know, there might be very warm summers and so on, but there's no reason for storms or anything in this. That they say about storms is actually fiction. We do have some extremes going on, but they're the wrong type of extremes. They happen from a long jet stream, a wildly changing jet stream, and big fluctuations of flow north and south, and that causes big storms and big contrast even one day to the other, as you've noticed in the last year or so in Britain and Europe. So they have the wrong type of experience. But instead, anything that happens, they say it's CO2. Now, they're lying, and they know they're lying. The journalists, of course, make it up anyway, so they don't know if they're lying or not. Next one. That's just what I said already about CO2, 50 times more in the sea than the air. Okay. Now, I just want to get to the bottom of this, because people were quite keen on this being done in Porto. So what we're told is, up a tiny bit, thanks a lot, Philip. The surface of the Earth, you see, they say, oh yeah, well, light coming in and whatever, it's emitting photons, right? And then if you have some CO2 that stops a photon, then, then those photons are going to come back one that way and one the other. Right. So there's going to be warmer here because there's extra photons coming there. Now, this diagram is complete hocus pocus rubbish, but it is taught to children at school. And it's brainwashing. First of all, the idea of conservation of photons is complete poppycock, right? If a light shines on me, that light, there's a whole lot of photons hitting me. My body doesn't remember, oh my God, we've had 1,000,001 photons hit us in the last microsecond. We're going to send them all back. Or whatever, or the infrared ones that hit me, we're going to send them back. Well, it doesn't work like that. When a photon hits something, it ends, finito. There's no memory, nothing. So this assumption is complete poppycock. But let's just talk about the basic idea, leaving aside that nonsense, but the idea that the CO2 is causing something. Can you go on the next one? So a little experiment, a little tiny bit more up. Okay, you have two bottles, one with extra CO2 and one with less CO2. And for the sake of argument, Phil can be the ground. He's radiating, and I've got extra CO2 in, and somebody could stand beside me. Does someone want to stand beside me? There we are. Or you could be the extra CO2, so you're like a black body, you see, if you don't mind.
No.
Okay, and I can be a white body, but I'm not extra CO2. So you're going to be absorbing extra, like this one, you see? So, you're going to absorb more radiation because you're more absorbing. And so you will get warmer in a short time, quicker than I will, right? So that's when they stop the experiment and say, look, anything with CO2 gets warmer, case proved. Now, let's see what happens after the next few hours. Next slide. Now what really happens is, she warms up quicker, but then I eventually catch up. And then when you turn the heat source off, or, he just cools down, she'll cool down quicker, and then I'll follow suit. Okay, that's what happens. So there's no extra warming if you go into equilibrium. Right, now next picture. This one, suppose, for the sake of argument, that they're right. So, what was your name again?
Sharon.
Sharon, that's right. So Sharon heats up more than I do. Fantastic, okay. That is their argument. Sharon's got to heat up more than I do because I'm not absorbing CO2. I haven't got so much CO2 in me. Now, so we can have a constant temperature difference, and I can set up a little motor between the two of us. So we've got a back radiation powered perpetual motion machine. That is modern physics, so called, right? And it is complete bullshit. It is contrary to, one, the first law of thermodynamics, i.e. heat is flowing uphill from Phil to Sharon. And secondly, conservation of energy, because we can get something for nothing out of it.
We should
No.
patent it, patent it.
Well, this has been known for 1,000 years, I would say, but anyway, well, perhaps 100 years. Okay, so it's not possible. However, if you quiz them closely, then some of them say, no, Piers, that's, we know it's, what you say is true. Really, that's just a simplified story for schools, and what's really happened is about the adiabatic lapse rate. So, they do revert to physics. You can sit there, you can stay if you like. No, okay. So they revert to physics in the next slide. I've explained that, it's nonsense. They revert to physics. The back, next one down. Right, and this is more important. Now this is what they say, and this is true, to start with, that the temperature on the surface is something, and as you go up in the atmosphere it's cooler, because when a gas goes up it expands and does work, or if you throw something upwards it slows down against gravity and it's therefore going to be cooler. So it's a gravitational effect, just like Ned and Carl explained. So the CO2 argument says, well, you add a greenhouse gas to this, and the upper atmosphere is, the height of it is defined as to where infrared radiation can escape into the sky, into the night sky or the dark or whatever. So more CO2, that level, physical level goes up, okay? So the same lapse rate translated downwards will make it warmer at the surface. If you move that up a tiny, there we are, warmer at the surface. So there you have the global warming. Now that, on the face of it, is correct physics, okay? But there's two things going on which negate it. One is the extra CO2, which they're keen on, also makes all plants grow faster, and there's evidence now of actual extra greening of the earth because of a bit more CO2. When they grow faster, they transpire more, and that is a cooling. So the extra cooling can completely negate their so-called, their expected warming. Okay? The other thing is, there's a problem up here. The assumption is that there's a constant day-night temperature. Now, there is not a constant day-night temperature. The temperature here fluctuates up and down day and night. Now, if you just scan back, I know this is going to be a bit tedious, go back to the bottles graph, this one. No, this will do, right. If we didn't wait for that, we'd have this one going up and down, up and down, up and down, or like this and like this, but on a shorter time scale. This would go up, down, and Sharon would go up, down, but a wider range. She would definitely go up and down quicker, right? So there'd be a wider variation from Sharon than there will be from me, okay? So now we go back to what happens in the upper atmosphere. This thing here then is going to fluctuate day and night. And if there's more CO2, that will fluctuate more. Okay, next one. Right, so here we have it. So there's going to be a range of temperatures in the upper atmosphere. And the radiation goes out as the fourth power of the temperature. So the average of fourth powers is bigger than the fourth power of the mean. Right, if you've got 1, 2 and 3, the mean is 2. 1 to the 4 plus 3 to the 4th is 82. When you halve that, you've got 41. Okay. 2 to the 4th is 16, which is less. Okay. So the extra CO2 or water vapour, which actually is a more significant thing anyway, in the upper atmosphere would cause a wider range and therefore extra radiation cooling. Now they claimed the upper atmosphere, because of the CO2, would have after 10 years a hot spot. Okay, next graph. That's their hot spot graph, and this was the observation. It's a cold spot. I asked Professor Richard Lindzen about that, and he said, well, the data's wrong. Probably. But that was 8 years ago. And no one's come up with any data which shows a hot spot. So everything in their theory is poppycock. Okay. Well, now we've got that out of the way. What's next? We're going to move on to the next one. We'll try and skate over this stuff to get to the new ideas more and to why they're putting this stuff forward. They had this scenario in 2010, temperatures would go up and CO2 would go up. CO2 did go up, temperatures went down. Their data sets, temperature went down. So what did they do? Did they hold up their hands and say we were wrong? No, they didn't. What did they do? Next picture. They changed the facts. They modified data to say blah because of urban heating or whatever. Whereas what they were doing was undervaluing urban heating and so forth. So actual raw data was this, and then they suddenly said, oh, or sorry, no, that's the raw data. And then the measured data, the reported final adjusted checked whatever data, European Union approved data, will be colder in the past and warmer in the present. Slide it around just to make the cold past the past colder and so on. Next one. And they regularly report forecasts. They always give out forecasts for warmer weather than actually happens, and they carry on doing that consistently. Next one. So their actual data sets. The black one was one they made in 2001, and it's there, in 1975, and it goes on to here, right, there it is. So that's the increase in that period. Then they had made various data sets, and one produced the version of 2010 data sets. I mean, it's the data set they agreed with, the right one in 2010, and that has it colder in the past and warmer in present. And the difference is half a degree. So it's fraud by half a degree. So knock out that half a degree, and the peak of world temperatures in 2003 goes to the same as what it was in about 1940 or thereabouts. So there's been no warming at all for the last 60 years. We do have a 60-year cycle though. Okay, next one. They told us of world runaway warming would happen, it didn't. They told us there'd be droughts and heat waves in the UK, we've had floods and cold. They told us there'd be more USA hurricanes, we've had less. They said there'd be world massive ice melts only on the BBC. Well, we had world massive ice melts, in reality we haven't. And polar bears are doing very well. And next one. No, sorry, there's a last sentence in there somewhere. Oh yes, we're going to have the end of snow, and we've had more snow, and we'd have early springs, and we've had late springs. Okay. And that's just what's going to happen in the mini ice ages, i.e. we're going to have more, certain types of storms will become more common, and we'll have more hail. And that has definitely been observed, and I've forecast this in 2008 in New York. All right, next one, we can get past all that. So, I think I'll just carry on, but I think we better compress this stuff a bit. Right, we've gone through why their actual anti-physics arguments. First and second laws of thermodynamics violated. Henry's law about equilibrium between gases and a liquid containing solutions is violated, and they ignore non-equilibrium thermodynamics. Okay, now the politics of it. Go up a little bit. We could spend ages on this, but I'll just give you, that one. 2004, I was invited to the Global Oil Summit, Houston, Texas, by the big oil companies, and I wasn't quite sure why I was there. But I went anyway, and I gave this presentation where, you know, it was about 100 people there, and I thought, well, that's a bit small for a World Oil Summit, and I realised who they were. They were the top executives of all the oil companies and their sidekicks and governments and the American military, and Putin's scientific advisor was there and so forth. So anyway, I gave this talk and said, look, it's the sun what does it? And they said, yeah. They all agreed. Oh, that's nice, that's well done, Mr. Putin. And then the Russian guy, Andrei Leonov, says, oh, I want to sit by you at lunch. I said, oh, that's nice. Anyway, I'm just finished, and this guy comes up to me and he says, oh, Mr. Corbyn, I just want to show you. We're on to the case. I said, oh, yeah, okay, what? And he showed me graphs, which some of them were similar to my sort of graphs about solar activity. So I said, well, why have you got me here then, because you know it already? He said, oh, well, we wanted to check independently, and you're doing stuff in the field, and you're doing leading long-range forecasts, so we want to hear what you've got to say. I said, that's nice. And who are you? I said. He said, oh, I'm retiring at this meeting, but I, up until this day, am the chief executive of ExxonMobil. So, he knows, he knew then what's going on. And his successor, I would suggest, also knew what was going on. Okay, so later in the year we asked them for some money, and we also asked the United Nations for money. The United Nations didn't reply. The oil companies came back straight away, and there was an insider who asked them and said, oh, give him money to Mr. Corbyn. Well, we like what he says, but no, because we do not want to upset the Green lobby. I'll repeat that. We do not want to upset the Green lobby. Now, these are the people that Greenpeace tell us are the sworn enemies of greenness. Well, actually, they're not. They fund the Green lobby. But it's a no-brainer. You see, the Green argument is used for them to maintain oil price. In fact, their websites are quite explicit. They say, we support action against CO2 so long as there is a uniform price for carbon across the board. So, the price of energy has to go up to make it worth a farmer burning food, right? Biofuels. So, the price goes up. And so it means it basically doubles the profit on everything the oil companies already produce, on average. I mean, there's fluctuations and so on, but that's what it's about. So it's a complete no-brainer. They control 98% of the market, they double the profit on this, give away 2% to, you know, whatever, biofuels, wind farms, whatever, right? It's a complete no-brainer. So they'll carry on believing, right? So, but anyway, what's behind all this is a pack of lies, okay? So, the Club of Rome some years ago said, no, we know it's nonsense, let's just make up a story to unite the world around world government, this or that, or whatever, okay? I mean, it's perfectly clear, you can read the stuff, and it's not argued about what they said. Next one, and this is a kind of a more interesting one, because this is more recent. Well, the Club of Rome says things often, but that was an old quote. This guy, Edenhofer, the co-chair of the IPC Working Group 2, said in 2010, and they still say these things if quizzed, one has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. This has almost nothing to do with it. So they have a policy which is designed to extract money from leading countries and give them to despots and so on around the world that do their bidding. Now, there's people around who propagate this idea as socialism. It's all right, Piers, well, we're just redistributing wealth, so it's good, isn't it? You know, even if it's based on lies. I say, well, who actually is gaining? Because I haven't noticed an increase in welfare of people sleeping on the streets in Camden Town, or indeed in Africa. Where does the money go? The money goes to the biggest super corporations in the world, who say, oh, we're going to save the planet by damming the whole of the Amazon basin. That's what they're trying to do right now. They want to dam all of that to make hydroelectricity to save the planet. We're going to remove all those tribes there, because they're past their sell-by date, and we're going to destroy the natural habitat because we're saving the planet. Okay? I mean, it's nonsense, isn't it? But that's what they're doing. Wind farms, of course, are made by super-duper investors. It's not, you can't, you know, you couldn't afford to build even a quarter of one turbine in the back of your garden, not even a tenth of one. But, you know, it's big money. And anyway, they don't do what they say. But let's have a look. Okay, so CO2, what we're seeing is not a reduction of CO2 anyway, because they've been, we'll come into discussion on this later because we have to get on to stuff. But the deindustrialisation of the West and moving industry to India has not reduced CO2, it's just changed where it's done. And you've paid for the transfer of industry from northern England to India. That's what you've done. You've paid for it. The European Union has enforced it through the European Emissions Trading Scheme, whereby the Indian companies are given credits for running down industry in Britain and use those carbon credits to build another steel mill in India. And we can't use those carbon credits to rebuild industry in Britain. So the European Union is an explicit asset stripping, job destruction machine in the interests of big international corporations. Yes, you could call that as saying, anyway, okay. Carry on. We've done this stuff about energy prices and all that. What to do about it, because we're going to get on to section 2 soon. In terms of the United Nations, I'd say that global warming is another weapon of mass destruction. It's a story. Okay. Carry on down. We're being told all this stuff, but bear in mind the renewable energy revolution is only like this small percentage of the total energy. This is oil and that is coal. So the changes are not big, but the prices are going up everywhere to make this happen. So as I said, the green lobby, the oil lobby are laughing their way to the bank. Okay. Now, key thing to understand arguing with people. How green is my green? The Drax power station burns wood chips, destroying forests in America and producing microparticles equivalent to increasing the diesel pollution in Britain by 25%. So children are dying younger to save the planet. Electric cars, they produce more CO2 per mile than ordinary cars and cost loads more. And I predicted 2 years ago it was going to crash, and it is crashing, and I hope Elon Musk ends up in prison for a long time. Hooray! Okay. The prayer wheels wind farms are not what they're made out to be. An interesting study from Harvard University recently, which I was quite surprised at, they pointed out that at night time, the surface of near the ground, it gets pretty cold. I mean, you can have airflow, but there's a slower airflow near the ground, and on a typical night, it'll be radiation from the ground, it'll be colder. But if you've got a wind farm around there, this huge amount of air mixing up all the time makes it more turbulent, and it basically stirs it all up a bit, which makes the surface in the area of those wind farms warmer. So actually, the actual contribution of wind farms to world temperatures is a warming, they say, and they've worked it out, you know, came to 0.2 of a degree or half a degree or something, I don't know. I thought, well, that's amazing, but that's what they're saying, and they're actually the sort of people you expect to be on the other side. Anyway, enough, I told you about hydropower and so on. There's only one thing I would say, yeah, this is all right. No, carry on. Whatever we do, we should still defend real nature, right? Don't throw, you know, true green out, but fake green has to be destroyed. So we have to destroy all these bad ideas. Next one. What should we got to do? We've got to enjoy life, accept that man can't change climate, stop all these phony carbon reductions, but keep what I call honest, true green policies, and use my long-range weather forecasting to keep them up. Okay. And in general terms, and this is more about your electric universe, it's unfortunate it's got the same initials as the European Union, isn't it? But
well, they're both mistakes, you see.
You see, this, it's as you were painting earlier, it's not just meteorology that has got some dodgy things going on. The standard gravity theory requires lots of dark matter, which appears not to exist anyway. So there's stuff wrong. There's recent measurements go up a tiny bit of the, quark physics, and basically the measurements, the energy is coming out wrong by a factor of 4 sigma. So they can say with 99.99% confidence that the theory is incorrect, but they haven't got round to saying that. They've just said the measurements don't work yet, or something. Anyway, what we're saying is we need to have a new independent academy of advanced, accountable, evidence-based science and politics. So we should applaud that. So Ivan here is pioneering the building of that, and this meeting and joint meetings with CONLAF and Weather Action and what happened in Porto are part of that. So we put this idea forward there, and they agreed it would be done. They would join into it. So we'll see how Neil's action Warner comes back. But I mean, we're on the right track, I think, and we've got unity. We'll have to proceed, step by step, drawing people in. But I think, well, I'm optimistic. We'll meet opposition. Okay, next one. I've said that already, but just to say, in a society based on lies, speaking the truth is a revolutionary act. And all the political parties around the world, of course, have the globalist lobby within them, which is the same people as the global warming lobby. And there's others who believe in accountability. It's a cross-party thing. So I think we have to be clear that, we're talking about accountability versus, globalisation on behalf of the super rich. And obviously there's political implications within parties, but see, the left-right labels, so-called, don't really work, because you can't describe the Democrats as left-wing when, just because they say they are, when they bomb Libya to bits and of course robbing the poor by, climate taxes. So, it's just get rid of those labels, I say, they confuse thought. Okay. And I think that is the end. That is it. That is that presentation. Applaud there. Thank you very much. 5-minute break and then do the next
Yeah.
one, or shall we
No,
just
well, we're actually running out of time.
No, we'll be fine.
We'll be fine. We could have another half hour or so.
Oh yeah.
Have you arranged it with them? Excellent.
All right.
Yeah, okay, we'll take 5 minutes.